Hey you guys, Josh Vision. I'm here to bring to you my Taken Season 1, Episode 1 review. So, essentially, the episode starts off with Brian Mills and his sister on a train on their way to their parents' house. And Brian basically notices that there's two assassins, I believe, that might be caught, that basically armed and loaded. And he basically tells the sister, listen, when I yell, that means there's a problem, and you just stay down, get down as quickly as possible. I believe he takes down one of the attackers, maybe both, but I believe it was one, and somehow his sister still died. And obviously he's distraught about this, especially the scene where he has to basically tell his parents, what had happened. After that, we see the character of Christina Hart. Christina Hart is basically the deputy to the National Intelligence, and she's in charge of her own little covert CIA operations group. So they basically run, search on Brian Mills, and they find that he was a Green Beret for 3 years. No, he was just a Green Beret, and that he had three tours in Iraq, and that there's a possibility that this shooting wasn't random. Obviously, that this shooting was intended, and they had a very specific target. It come to find that his sister actually was a target, and this had to do with what Brian Mills did to, I believe, his son. Anyways, the guy's name is Carlos Medihi or Medijo, something like that. I was gonna call him Carlos. Carlos, who's in charge of a cartel and basically running terrorism and drugs, through the United States. And the reason why he has beef with Brian Mills because Brian Mills killed his son some 7 years ago, possibly, if I remember correctly. Which in actuality, Brian Mills did kill him, but that's because the guy had a gun to a DEA agent named Mike, who after this, I believe, or a little bit before, was friends with Mills. So Mills figures out about the assassination tip basically on him. Well, not really assassination tip. They just basically Carlos' men basically want Mills, just basically grab Mills and take him back to Carlos alive. So essentially, he goes back to his house and everything's all calm. Christina's and her group are basically tracking his every movement. And I believe like 5 or 7 shooters show up at his house. He takes out all of them. One of them, I believe, he basically gets his phone before, the dude dies. What else happened in this episode? So he calls his friend Mike, remember the DEA who he saved years ago. He tells him that, listen, you and your daughter should go away somewhere because they're gonna come after you, pretty much like they did my sister. So Mike tells him, listen, I'm not gonna let you go about this alone. I'll help you. I'll be there in 5 hours. Mike's like, all right. Brian's like, all right. Turns out Mike was aware of the fact that Brian's sister was targeted, but Mike tells Brian that the reason why because it was either your sister or my daughter, so he was in a tough spot. So Brian basically tells him, "Do you have any connection to Carlos?" He's like, "Man, I don't have any connection to Carlos. You should know that. The only connection I have to Carlos is basically the lawyer in New York." So Brian basically handcuffs Mike to to the top part of the car, and they're driving all through New York, and he takes out numerous of Carlos's men in the process, trying to find this lawyer. Then he takes him like you know, underground basically. And at one point, he was actually about to shoot Mike. But Mike says, "Listen, I'm sorry that about what happened to your sister, but I really had a hard choice to make either way. It's either your sister or my daughter, and I hope you never have a daughter." And it's kind of ironic how he said that because we know this is a prequel to the actual film that Brian does have a daughter. So that was very interesting. What I liked about that little exchange. So basically, Brian doesn't shoot him. He says, "Listen, just get out of my sight. I don't ever want to see you again." So Mike leaves. But it turns out his daughter was actually captured, I believe. So back to Brian. Brian basically tells Carlos's men, "Listen, I know you guys are after me. I don't want to run the rest of my life. Just come and get me, whatever." So he gets taken to this warehouse and he's hung up in handcuffs. He's been beat up, obviously, due to little scars here and there and a little black eye. And we finally see Carlos himself. And ironically, we did see Carlos in the beginning. Carlos basically, was in disguise essentially when we first saw him. We just saw he was just, this regular dude, but that was actually him. So he basically confirms to Brian how his sister died. He shot her. And Brian was enraged, and his reason for it was, you killed my son. And Brian's like, your son basically had a gun to a DEA agent. You killed my innocent sister who was defenseless. So that makes you nothing more than a coward. So before Carlos could try to torture / kill Brian Mills, Christina Hart's people got in there ASAP. The CIA, basically, they just ran roughshod. And at one point, basically near the end, the situation was very similar to how Carlos's son, Mike, and Brian was years ago. Instead, the roles were kind of reversed. Brian was the one with the gun to his head, and Carlos had the gun. So Carlos basically tells CIA agents, he's like, listen, he killed my son. And basically, Brian breaks his arm or something, and then he has him right he wants, and he said, this is for my sister. Before he can pull the trigger, they shoot Brian, probably with like a pellet or something. It was enough to knock him out, but not, penetrate him, obviously. And he wakes up, and he's told everything by Christina Hart herself about what she does, how she's a deputy to the national, intelligence people, how she's in charge of her own little CIA covert group, and that they were tracking him the entire time. But she also makes an offer to him saying that, listen, the reason why we didn't want you to kill him, Carlos, because we can gather more and more evidence that'll be worth, putting him away forever, make him suffer even more, you know what I mean? And Brian was like, okay, what if I refuse? And she said, well, if you refuse, you're basically going to be letting down your sister because you are a natural protector. That's why you saved those 93 passengers on the train. And you don't want to make it seem as though your sister's sacrifice and death was basically meaningless. So she leaves him with that, and he contemplates, and that's how the episode ends. Thank you guys for watching this video. Like the video if you can. Subscribe to my channel so I can make more videos like this. And this is Josh Vision. Adios, people.